Anyone need a book? Lesson this morning, our book, lesson 9. On page 83. Booklet 63, can't hardly read. Solomon's wisdom. What is the first thing we think about when we think about the wisdom of Solomon? Story of the little baby, right? Two ladies who each had a child. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But this is just an example of the wisdom that Solomon had. I'd like, before we get into our lesson, we have a really long text. So I'm not going to try to read it this morning because it's going to take up quite a bit of our time. But I want to paraphrase it very quickly. In my introduction this morning, the rulers, in the first verse of our lesson text this morning, it says that Solomon made a treaty with the Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Now, this is not an uncommon thing for kings of nations at this particular period of time would make treaties or make deals with the kings of nations around them. And it served a purpose. And the purpose, of course, was that they made those people their allies, and it was for their own protection as well as to keep the nations around them from invading them. So, in this case, Solomon does the same thing. Now, remember now that when David turned over the throne, so to speak, to Solomon, he gave Solomon some instructions. And we've talked about this in the last two lessons that we've had a little bit. The problems that arose between David and his son Absalom and the things that resulted as that difference in Absalom trying to take over the throne was that because of the situation, certain people took sides. And many of the people that we talked about here in the last few weeks that tried to defend David turned against him and began to follow Absalom. And because of this, David had to make some decisions that were not really what he wanted to make. But, situations change, circumstances take effect, as we all know in our life, that the outcome of this was that some of these friends that had befriended David to begin with, that turned against him, wound up being killed as other people took over. Power changed from one person to another. So we found out in the last few weeks that David, when he turns over the throne to Solomon, he tells Solomon, he says, you need to take care of certain things. Some people need to be taken out of the picture, so to speak. And because of this, when Solomon takes over the kingship, he makes some decisions, sometimes not good decisions, but he makes some decisions that are in accordance with what David told him that you need to do. Now, as the kings from one nation changed, many of them were warrior kings. And the warrior kings were those who, had great military might, men of war, and they were made king because of their power, so to speak. Politics was playing a big part in the world back then, as it does today. And so the kings were warriors, but the biblical kings were not, always that way. And of course, one exception being David. And David and Solomon were both warriors. But they also followed, unlike some of the kings of the ancient times, they also followed God. And so we see that David was also a psalmist. He wrote Psalms. It was very unlike, a warrior king would be. But, we have to remember that we cannot judge David entirely because of his power or his warrior status. And we can't judge him entirely because he was a psalmist in most of the Psalms, which were dedications to God. So we have to take into effect, the different times in David's life that he did different things. Solomon did the same thing. There were times that Solomon made decisions that were not good. And there were times that Solomon did exactly what he should have done. Well, and one of those times, we're going to talk about in a moment, being when he asked God for wisdom. And so I'd like to read for you just a moment a couple of paragraphs that come from the companion book that goes along with our classroom book. It says, wisdom, like songs, was a widely used mode of writing in the ancient Near East. Mesopotamia produced certain creation points and thoughts about evil, sin, and suffering. Egypt offered praises to its various gods. Israel borrowed from wisdom wherever it was to be found, or significantly expanded its scope. The wisdom literature of the Bible is properly Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, although several of the Psalms might also be called wisdom songs. Jesus, Ruth, and Daniel also features wise men and women like Joseph, Daniel, and Ruth. The Old Testament touches on wisdom in many ways. Solomon composed many songs and proverbs as well. If David was a psalmist, Solomon was a wise man. Two of the Psalms are also said to have been written by Solomon. The grandest of all the Psalms, of course, the Song of Solomon, was written by him. While Proverbs may have been wrung from the hearts of God's people everywhere, the opening verse of the book is Solomon, Proverbs. The name of the king, wise king, is not in Ecclesiastes, but Solomon is surely the subject when it begins with these words. The words of the preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So we see that the wisdom books in the Bible are, sometimes they don't say anything about who wrote it. They don't say anything about the priests. They don't say anything about the sacrifices that were made. But in a universal way, they manifest that in itself, wisdom is good. It's a good thing to have. And so the Proverbs and the Psalms idea of being wise is very important. And we need to remember those sayings, that adorations that were given in those particular contexts and those scriptures, that we need to take wise men took their place with the prophets, as Solomon did, and also that, it teaches us lessons. We need to use those proverbs and those psalms to learn a lesson for ourselves. We have some very wise advice which are given in those particular areas, and we need to be sure that we heed that advice as well. Solomon also was a builder, and our lesson text also shows that. So we'll get into the questions that we had, and hopefully we'll have enough time to get through them all. Question number 1. With whom did Solomon make a treaty? Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now, what do we know about the history before this time concerning the nation of Egypt? They enslaved Israel, right? So here it is now that Solomon is making a deal with the people who had actually kept them captive and enslaved them beforehand. Why would he do this?
Maybe they remember what happened. God's power will show people in Egypt, so they didn't want that to happen again.
Here is peace. Just said, someone over here said, but anyway, the peace that was brought about by becoming friends with their enemies, right? What's that old saying? Keep your friends close, and the enemies closer. Something like that. Maybe I've ever seen it.
Very common practice in that day for them to give a dollar to the king next door, and that kept them, especially the weaker ones, would give a dollar to the stronger nations as a means of protection.
You didn't hear what Steve was saying. He was pointing out that it was a common practice at the time for the leaders of one nation to make friends of the leaders of another nation by marriage, intermarriage between the two nations. And to give a daughter was, a much stronger bond than to give concubines or whatever. But this way they became not only friends, but they became relatives as well. And so, you're going to rise up against your relatives to make them slaves. Not as much, maybe not as likely on that. You know what happened, and it still happens even today in some of these eastern countries do this. So number 2, what 3 things does the text say Solomon built?
His own house.
Own house. And all around Jerusalem. Each had its purpose, right? What was his house like? That's putting it very simply and not meaning. You have a house. Solomon's wealth and position and power, and he probably had the most stately residence in the whole nation, the whole country. What about the Lord's house? He begins to rebuild the temple, right? Now, up until this, sometimes during the history of the nation of Israel, it was no more than a tent. It was movable. place for a while and then moved to another place. It was necessary, as they moved. So it wasn't a stationary structure, so to speak. Now, Solomon wanted to make that a change, right? He wanted to have a permanent dwelling for God. And so he begins to build that. He also, as already been mentioned, he rebuilt or built the wall around Jerusalem. What was that purpose of that? Protection, right? Protection from invading troops, so to speak. And I'm sure it wasn't a simple wall. Maybe some of you that have been to that part of the country could describe what kind of wall it would be. Steve?
Jerusalem,
Yeah.
they built walls as a source of protection because they didn't have the artillery and things so they built walls, big gates, so that it would protect, and this in case would be especially because it protected the sort of spiritual city of that day, and then it also was going to protect this temple to God.
Okay, you've been to Jerusalem?
Yes, sir.
Does it still have a wall around it?
Yes, sir. In places.
In places. Okay. Now, it's changed, of course, the other things changed too. But at this particular period in time, it wasn't unusual for any of the cities that were built at this time to have walls around. Remember, we talked, we learned in Scripture about the walls of Jericho. What happened to them? Failed. And, the walls there were completely destroyed. There's not one stone was left upon another. So we see that the walls played a big part in the history of any city at that particular period of time. Okay, question number 3. Where were the people sacrificing at the beginning of Solomon's reign?
In the high places.
In the high places. Now, what does this mean, high places?
Going up into the mountains.
Usually on a hill or a mountain, and of course, the city of Jerusalem had hills around it, right? And there was something different though about the Israelite people worshiping in high places. And what was that? Something God didn't like about them worshiping in high places.
It's not God.
Okay. This is also the place where idolatry took place a lot. Not only that, but there were other things that took place there, human sacrifices being one of those things that would often occur, because people of the country, that were not Israelites, that were not part of the Jewish nation, they also worshiped in high places, and the worship that they did usually took place to idols and false gods. And so God didn't want them to be part of that. But why were they worshiping in high places? They didn't have a place to worship. Now, did they not have a place to worship because they just made it convenient to go up there and worship in places that were already there? Or did they just lapse in establishing a place of worship? Now, I think that was the problem. They did not want to take time to build place to worship. This is what Solomon was trying to change. In the meantime, in order to keep the worship going, he worshiped in high places too. There was one particular place that he worshiped more than any other place. What was that? Gibeon. What does the Bible say about Gibeon? reasons was that Solomon, they worshiped. Now, in our lesson today, it says that he worshiped there he went there for a particular reason. What was that reason?
Of the sacrifice.
The sacrifice, right? What kind of sacrifice? Okay, let's look at our lesson text. Chapter 3, verse 5 says that Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream. Okay, you back up just a minute. Verse 4 says, now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. The Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings for that altar. Can you imagine offering 1,000 burnt offerings? What was usually a burnt offering made of?
Best of the flock.
Sorry, Pam?
The best of everything they had in the flock.
Best of whatever they had. Usually animal sacrifice, right?
What was this acceptable to God?
Not because of not where the place was. God,
I mean, to have those burnt offerings. Was he pleased with that?
God accepted burnt offerings. As a matter of fact, they were
Okay.
certain periods of time and certain places. Now, what makes this a little bit unusual is that God appears to Solomon at this particular point in time. And he asked Solomon a question. What was the question he asked Solomon?
What do you want?
What can I do for you? Right? What do you want of me? And can you imagine God coming to you and asking you, Pat, what do you want from me?
And our carnal minds be sort of like the rubbing of a lamp and getting a genie up. I want 3 wishes instead of 1.
Yeah. God's not a genie. He's not a bank. The whole point being here is that, if what would be a normal reaction from us? What would our request be to God? He came right to us and said, I'm going to give you whatever you want.
I would say a place in heaven.
Place in heaven.
I'd be afraid to say anything else.
That's a good thing to say. But being human, what are most humans going to ask for? Riches, power, health,
Well,
Well,
it's all listed right down through there. It said, because you did not ask for these.
yeah. So,
Didn't you double, sorry, but didn't you double, he didn't ask for it, he gave it all to him and he doubled it.
yeah, that's right. Now, God's reaction, God is asked it to Solomon. Now, Solomon, I'm wondering how long Solomon had to think. How am I going to answer this question? What was his response?
give him a good heart.
It says, give me a good heart. Give me a just heart.
Yes.
Give me a heart of understanding. Now, what he's asking for, he says, give me the power to make proper decisions in ruling the nation I'm about to take over. That I'm about to have, that I've been placed over. He says at this particular point in time, he says, God, I need your guidance. I'm a child. I don't know what to do. says, so give me the ability to make decisions that are fair and just for my people.
I guess if I had been as wise as Solomon, I would have asked that instead of on the heaven, because I would know my path.
We often think about Solomon as being, the wisest of all leaders, wisest of all men, and he was. Why was he the wisest of all men? Because he asked God for that wisdom, right? He asked God for something that didn't give him an advantage over everybody else as far as wealth, health, and the other things that we mentioned already. He already was the most powerful person in the world. Probably already was very wealthy, being probably one of the most wealthy people in the world as well. He didn't need wealth. He didn't need power. He already had it. So he asked for something that he didn't have. And that was helping to rule the nation. Being able to do it fairly and honestly and justly. Now, God answers him. And what's God's answer?
Basically, I'll give you all that and more.
He says, he says, because you didn't ask for health and wealth and power and all this stuff, he says, I'm going to give you what you asked for. But because you didn't ask for all those other things, I'm going to give that to you too. He says, not only that, if you will follow the statutes and my commandments, I'm going to give you a long life. So we see that Solomon's given everything he needs to do the right thing. And then the next section of our lesson today, we're going to focus on time. 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 16 through 28, when these women come before him, and our lesson text refers to these women how? Two harlots. Now, our word for them today would be prostitutes. And, a lot of people don't think about that when they're reading this story or retelling this story. But these women gave birth very close to each other, just a few days apart from each other. Lived in the same house together. And one of the women evidently in her sleep rolls over on the child and kills her child. And so what does she do? While the other woman is still asleep with her child, she swaps the children, places the dead child in the bed with the woman who still has a live child, takes the live child, and then claims it as her own. The other lady wakes up in the morning and she finds the child dead. But on closer examination of the child, she finds out it's not her child. And so she goes to Solomon for a decision to be made. What's Solomon's reaction?
He listens to both the ladies.
He listens to the story, right? He listens to one side, he listens to the other side. Now, let it been a judge today what would happen. to make a decision based on what they did. No witnesses. What would the judge today do?
But back to the.
Yeah. Well,
Take the child and put somebody else's on.
yeah, you know, we've got, we've got scientific research now that can tell us whose child it was, you know. But at that particular time, they didn't. So anyway, Solomon makes a decision, and he's making a decision based on what human reaction's going to be, right? He tells the servants to get a sword and do it. He said, now, take that sword, cut the child in half. You're half one woman, half the other. And we all know the story. The real mother says no. Give her the child. That mother, that woman is thinking about what? Safety of the child, right? Safety of the child. And Solomon says, this is the mother. Because what was the reaction of the other woman when the woman said, okay, no, give her the child and let her take it? What's her reaction? What's the false mother, so to speak? Go ahead and cut it in two. Now, why do you suppose she said that? It wasn't her child.
Oh, that's.
So she was ready to steal the child and take it. Why didn't she just say, okay, I'll take it, that's my child, I'll take it?
Because she was already suffering from grief and wanted somebody else to suffer with her.
She was already suffering. She had lost her child. She didn't really want the other woman's child, but she didn't think it was fair for her child to die and the other woman still had hers. That's human mentality. Sometimes we don't think right. And sometimes we make decisions based on our own feelings, our own feeling of loss or guilt or whatever. But the real mother, she was thinking about the living child. So, what's the story? What's the lesson we need to get out of this? Not trying, is the lesson not, don't try to be even, do the right thing. Now, any of you mothers that are in here would probably react in the same way that your mother did, right? No, don't kill my child. I'll give the child up rather than let the child be killed. Fathers will probably the same way. The whole problem, the whole idea is that Solomon had found a way that he could come to the truth without doing any more harm. And in so doing, of course, he made the right decision. What was the reaction of the people of the nation of Israel when they found out what Solomon did? They feared. Now, the word fear is used in Scripture a lot of times. It doesn't mean be afraid of. It means have respect for. They feared Solomon. What they do is they feared God. They had respect for Solomon because Solomon showed his people men to have respect for God because God was the one who guided Solomon. And the respect that they were supposed to have for Solomon was not only because of his position, but was because he was following God. Life would be much better for us. Thank you, son. That's enough. Thank you for your attention and your comments.